Hello and welcome back to the channel, and thank you for joining me in another of my monologues. I had an interesting email which I think is very poignant at this time. As you know, on this channel, Julia and I are going to be heading off, hopefully, to buy some piece of land and to try and be part of the solution ourselves. And I'll talk a little bit about how that links into the email that came in. But let's have a look. This is from somebody called Roy, who says, "Good morning, Richard. I'm writing to you out of incredulity that with all the insightful and beneficial awakenings that have allegedly taken place around the UK and beyond, we haven't witnessed any change. No emergence of sovereign communities growing, a return to community cooperation and unity for the sanctity and safety of those in the community. No evidence of the emergence of community peace officers, the return to trial by jury, the absence of challenge to the oppressive tyrannical regime that we all live under, seems somehow silent apart from the individual podcasts, vlogs, TikToks, and there seems to be a void. I have emailed," he says, "a number of times, some of those whom you have interviewed, as suggested by them during your interviews, and sadly not even received an acknowledgement. It appears that most are paying lip service to their claims that we have rights, but without unity, nothing changes," he says. "Surely, with the numbers who are awake and aware of how the system works, we, the people, should be able to enter the system and completely dismantle it and rebuild it the way it should be. Or is the hope that over time it will simply wither and die when everyone eventually walks away from it? And then what? Then do we start to rebuild a community of individuals?" And as I say, that's from Roy. Thank you very much, Roy, for sending that in. And I thought that was worthy of sharing with you. And maybe you are as frustrated as Roy, in as much as thinking, well, we've been talking about this for some time. There must be enough awake individuals now to go out and change everything, that communities ought to be growing and that we can filter away from the tyrannical system and do something else. And I was always a bit dubious, I have to say, about these larger communities. I mean, we do hear about these assemblies and communities and various things, and people are filtering off, and then actually you end up with a whole load of those, and I don't know. People tell me that these communities end up with people arguing, and people who go to the land in sort of commune type situations or large communities of people doing it, they all fall apart because everybody wants to do it their way. Nobody's prepared to have any kind of hierarchy, and it all falls apart. And that may be true because we've been so used to hierarchy for thousands of years. You think of the feudal lords, and then you think of corporations and governments. It's all hierarchy, and we're all sort of going, no, we can't have that. Well, I don't personally think that hierarchy is a bad thing if those at the top are benevolent and want to actually bring everybody else up. However, it does seem that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So I think that actually the solution is that people in dribs and drabs will just drift away. I think that expecting large communities sovereign communities to grow, and people will in vast numbers get onto the land and set up their own projects and things like that. I don't know that that will work in any great number. You may see one or two, but I think actually because we are individuals and perhaps we're in small numbers, families, couples, and on our own, I think it's more likely that people will just turn away from the system and say, do you know what, enough is enough. And in a way, that's what Julia and I are doing, and that we'll find our piece of land and we'll do our own farming, perhaps get as off-grid as we can. It's difficult to say what really being off-grid really means these days, because we would still probably need plastics and diesel, petrol. We'd be reliant on metals and tools and those sort of things, which of course the grid would have provided through the manufacturing of these processes, not by us, but obviously by corporations and what have you. But in time, if more people are prepared to, in dribs and drabs, just turn their back and say, do you know what, I'm just not going to go with this. I'm not dealing with you in that way. I'm going to go my own way. I think that is the easiest and the biggest route. After all, when eventually people turn away from a tyrannical government or public authority, and there's nobody left, they're going to look very isolated. They're just going to sit there and go, well, actually, we've got no one to govern. And they may try, but if people are just going away, as I say, on their own, I think then, having set up their own mini little areas, wherever it is, whatever they're doing their own businesses, whether they're staying in their houses or going on the land, and just saying, you know, I'm not going to work for corporations. I'm going to set up my own little business, my own tiny little business, and barter and trade with one another. Then I think that is the way you do it. So I envisage that people will be off-grid, that people will be saying, well, I'm growing pigs, you're growing cows. Can I exchange some pork for some beef? You're doing milk and you're doing veg. Can I exchange some of this for that? And I think that's where the communities will grow, by individuals having their autonomy to do the things they want to do, but being able to barter or trade or use money or whatever they wish to use with other people. And then eventually communities will say, well, look, actually, we've got a bit of land. Why don't you bring your pigs over here and we can expand that, and maybe they could bring theirs over here, or our land adjoins your land, let's expand it. But I think to expect people to go straight into communities, big communities as it were, on the land is probably unlikely, because if people are investing all in that, there will be too many egos. Let those egos work themselves out on their own little property, in their own little one-man band businesses or their family-run operations, and then trade with others, and let us relearn what it is to be in a community. I don't think that we are in a position to understand that, because we've allowed the corporations and the big businesses and the big greedy hierarchies to take over and influence how we do things. And I think we've got to unpack how you live in a real freedom environment. And the best thing I see is that people just simply walk away from the tyrannical governance that we have. And that seems to be the easiest and most sensible option in my mind. But you may disagree. And of course, you're very welcome to disagree. You may have other opinions. Be interesting to read those in the comments. Thanks for watching. Take care. Have a wonderful day. See you next time.